Welcome to the GreatBase Tennis Podcast, episode 255. I'm Steve Smith. At the table, we have Ilja Semjonovs. Is that how you pronounce your name this week?
Perfect. Keeps getting better.
Keeps getting better.
Yeah.
Also, we have Dave Anderson and a special guest that Dave's brought to join us. Thank you, Tracey King. Dave, why don't you introduce Tracey and we'll get rolling?
Well, hi, everyone. Looking forward to this tonight. A quick intro to Dr. Tracey King. I had the privilege of meeting Tracey actually in kind of just a chance meeting. She was friends with a student and their family. And gosh, what was it, Tracey? 3 years ago?
Yes, it would be. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And since then, she had a stint in Florida and has a great background as in psychology and sports psychology, and we were very fortunate to reconnect through the years and bring Tracey on as a full-time tennis coach, but more importantly to bring a mental skills training component into our club and into our academy. So yeah, just an incredible background. I'm looking forward, Tracey, to you sharing your wisdom with us tonight, and should be a great night.
No,
Thanks, Dave.
Thanks, Dave. Tracey, well, might you just tell the listeners your start in sport, your start on your journey in academia, and where you are now?
Okay, sure, yeah. Well, I'm a classic, how tennis runs in families. And that's certainly the case for me. My dad taught me to play, and his mom taught him. She was, the local club champion back in her day, my grandma. And my dad was a multi-racket sportsman. So he played tennis, squash, and badminton. As you did back then, nobody really specialized,
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, he taught me to play, and I fell in love with tennis straight away. I was a little late starting. I was 11, but nevertheless, it didn't hold me back, and I just went for it, I suppose, and had a pretty good junior career in New Zealand, good enough to get me a scholarship to come over here to the States. Started off at TCU and then transferred to Nevada and finished out my career there. So I enjoyed that whole time. Won a few conference singles titles along the way, which was great, and one doubles title and a team title in my senior year. So I was very happy with that. And then I had to make a decision, like you do, about what are you going to do next. And I sort of dabbled a little bit and played some what were called satellites at the time, mostly in the UK. Got a few points, got a ranking, but I don't know. I felt like I had kind of hit my ceiling, I suppose, and that's relevant to this conversation because, it had never been really taught to me to think about my tennis in terms of developing a game for the future. I suppose I had always focused on what was right in front of me. And so my game developed mostly around counterpunching and being, fast and fit and steely. And so it took me quite far enough, certainly for my happiness. But I did find that once I went out on the pro tour, on the lower pro tour, that my lack of weapons other than mental toughness and being quick, that wasn't sufficient, right? So, and that's okay. I wanted to explore where my limits were, and at the same time, I was very academic, and so I had been offered scholarship to return to grad school, so I did that, and I did my master's. So my undergrad was in psychology, my master's is in sociology and social research, and then my PhD is in psychology. So I have a very broad academic background, and so then I started lecturing at university, and eventually went back to New Zealand. And then I have a daughter who is 15 now and an aspiring tennis player. So we found our way back to the States, and here we are in Dallas, Texas.
Where did you, you went to TCU, then to Nevada. So just go back, where'd you do your grad and doctorate work?
Those were both in the UK. While I was at school in the States, my parents took an opportunity to move to the UK and took up teaching positions at universities there. And so when I graduated, my first instinct was to go home to New Zealand, but my own family weren't there. They were in England. So I went over there, and that was actually quite handy because obviously there's a lot of tournaments in England and on the continent as well. So I was able to travel around, use England as a base. I played one season of Bundesliga in Germany and all sorts of satellite tournaments all around, through Italy and France and the Netherlands and so on. And then I took up my master's at University of Kent, which is in Canterbury, the historic cathedral town of Canterbury, Kent. That was lovely. And then I did my PhD at the University of Southampton. So.
Oh, that's great. During your studies, did you go the whole scope with all sports, or were you just focused on tennis?
I was focused actually on behavioral health psychology mostly. I was really interested. My thesis was on the psychology of pain, and that was really what got me into. I was fascinated when I was an undergrad as a tennis player. I thought it was really interesting that you could have something that caused you pain. For example, I had a very deep, when you as a tennis player, you develop significant calluses on your hand, on your dominant hand, and sometimes if you don't take care of them, they can split, and they can split very deeply. And that happened to me on my thumb, and there was never an opportunity for it to heal because you're always continuing to try to play, and you, like all athletes, you never give yourself time to heal. You always want to get back on court. So it was one of these recurring things, and it was really, really painful because every time you struck the ball, you would feel it go straight through, it felt like to the bone. But what I noticed was that it would be painful during the warm-up, but then as soon as the first match ball was struck, I wouldn't feel it again until match point was over and we went to shake hands at the net, and then I would feel it again. And I thought that was really interesting, and I just really wanted to understand what that was about. What was happening there, this mind-body connection around something that we think of as being purely physical, i.e. pain. Clearly it's not. So yeah, that was really what piqued my interest, and that started me on my journey into psychology as a career. Recently, obviously, I've gotten much more interested in the last, I'd say, 7 or 8 years. I've been not so focused on pain as a topic and more interested in performance psychology. So helping athletes deal with all of the challenges that they face along the way on their journey to trying to discover their potential. And as you know, it's a long journey and with lots of challenges. So it's a never-ending, fascinating field to be in.
That was great. Tell us a little bit about pain when it comes down to one's background, the culture, or I guess doing all the academic work and then clinical work. Is it based on the individual? Obviously, it's probably based on everything, but a little bit here, a little bit there. But coming from one sport to the next, I think in a lot of ways, tennis is such a demanding sport, especially technically. But it's certainly not a collision sport. It's not a contact sport. So you're like, where does the toughness come from?
Yes, I do think that tennis players, in general, if they have if they can be cross-pollinated across other sports, that I do think that helps them to improve their pain tolerance and their ability to kind of suffer, I suppose. Nowadays, a lot of kids are specialising very early on and not having a lot of exposure to other cultures and other sporting experiences, and I'm not sure that that's always helpful in lots of different ways, in overall hand-eye coordination development, in also not learning to function in teams, if you're specialising in tennis very, very early on. And of course, with your attitude towards physical discomfort, so I don't know if that's linked to why we're seeing so many kids drop out. It feels as if they do drop out a lot sooner now out of matches, small tweak and there's a injury withdrawal. There's a lot of withdrawals out of back drawers. I'm sure that that's to do with a lot of different things, not just pain. But yeah, I do think that to a degree, pain is, and it's influenced by many different things, right? There's a certain amount of, there's a tiny bit of genetic component in there. Some people are actually just born with a higher pain tolerance, but the rest of it does come down to socialization and culture. And so obviously some sports are much kind of tougher when it comes to, there's an expectation that you're going to suffer pain, and that would not be a reason to not continue. And it becomes more of a challenge for them to figure out, when is it really serious? Like, when do I need to step back for my own safety? Which that's not often the case with tennis players.
Yeah, that's one more, then turn it over to Ilja and Dave. But being a New Zealander, what about rugby? I mean, if a kid plays rugby, they got to be pretty hard-nosed, right?
Well, exactly, yes. And my husband is a former rugby player, and rugby is obviously renowned for being a pretty tough sport. You've got to be able to take the knock. Before HIV and AIDS, it was common for rugby players to, they'd kind of get smashed on the field, and then they would just carry on, and there'd be blood streaming everywhere, and it would never cross their mind to pause. They would just, continue. That all changed along the way, but nevertheless, the culture of kind of suck it up and soldier on is very strong in rugby, and rugby is New Zealand's national sport. So I do think that has influenced us culturally across the board. We have some other pretty tough sports too that are not that well known. For example, field hockey is a big sport in New Zealand. I played field hockey up until I was a teenager. So did my mom and my sister. It's a very popular sport, and it's pretty tough as well. So yeah, I think their culture does play a big factor in how much you're prepared to kind of suffer through, just not just pain, but also discomfort.
Oh, thank you. Dave, go ahead.
Yeah, that's great stuff, Coach. And I've always felt, and you can speak on it as freely as you want, that do you feel that when people have come to you for in pursuit of mental toughness, those words for their child, do you think that it can be solved through really only dealing with the child, or do you think in many cases that the parental units are in equal need or greater need of your assistance?
Yes, that's a great question. Certainly, how can I say this? Certainly, I mean, I mostly work at the moment with the player, with the athlete. I would really welcome the opportunity to be able to broaden that out to the parents as well, because often, the parents are the primary support team when the athletes are actually at the competitions, which is when we see the pressure, right? So, and the parents want to support absolutely the best that they can, but they're not always kind of up with the play necessarily when it comes to the psychology of high performance, right? I mean, why would they be? They've got busy lives doing other things. And so they can suffer the stress just as much as the athlete when they get to a tournament. And stress is it's almost like a virus, right? It fills the air, and you see this in corporate environments too. So if one person is highly stressed, and that very quickly spreads through the team. And it's the same with parents and kids at tournaments. The parents may be completely unaware that they're actually increasing the pressure on the player without them realizing at all, and it's coming through. It's coming through their body language, coming through even maybe how quickly they start to speak. In the same way that you might see kids on the court start to rush when they're under pressure, then you also see parents starting to rush prior to the match beginning, or on the way to the courts in the car. There's this agitation, and it can definitely make what is already a challenging situation more difficult. So as much as I can explain to the athlete what's going on with their thoughts and emotions and their somatic sensations, and give them strategies to manage all of that, it certainly would be helpful to be able to broaden that out to the wider team as well, because we can all work together then, so we're all on the same page. And even with things like how to talk to the athlete during the match, if you're going to be talking to them during the match and after the match, there's a lot of new information in sports psychology, and just in the last 10 years has been massive strides and a change in thinking in a lot of important topics. And so, yeah, I would love to be able to work more with parents as well.
Oh, thanks. Go ahead, Ilja.
Yeah, I mean, again, thanks for being on this podcast, Tracey. That's great information. Just a question: after COVID, mental health became, I would say, more into light, and Osaka, Marty Fish, all those movies. So, it's more mainstream, and parents and kids see that. My question would be, what would be the age, to start with a mental training? I think sometimes, because mental health is so out there right now, I think everybody's trying to put their younger kids with a mental coach. And I mean, you tell me, I mean, what would be the limit to like how young they should work with a mental trainer? Because
yeah, that's a great question. Thank you. Yes, I have personally, I would say the youngest athletes that I've worked with have been 9 years old. Wow. I don't trying to think if I've worked with anyone younger than 9. I don't think so. I love working with 12 and under. I really do. Because I find it so joyful. They're so open-minded, and yet at the same, they're still, especially if they're competing. Not all 12 and unders have a full-on competition schedule, but some do. And those that are experienced the full route of pressure and, stress and anxiety and anger and frustration, and, that's all very real to them. Even though, for us grown-ups, we might think, oh, well, what are they upset about? It's just a 12 and under tournament, in the bigger picture, it doesn't matter at all. We can have that perspective, but to them, it's everything. So, and they're just so willing to discuss with me what's showing up to them. If I ask them, how the tournament went, I don't mean the results, but, what was your experience? They're quite happily tell me everything, and they're so, as I say, open-minded and willing to try the different techniques that I can then suggest to them. So if they tell me that they were super nervous before the match, or during the match, or they were upset after the match, or whatever the situation, then you can always suggest certain tools and techniques to help them manage that better next time. And they're very excited to try them, and it's great. I love working with that age group. I also like working with teenagers, but sometimes, things change as kids get older. Sometimes they get a little bit more self-conscious. I normally find working with the older kids that working one-on-one sometimes is better, because in the group they get quite self-conscious. So, the group can work, but I think you just have to, horses for courses, you have to sort of very carefully structure the group so that they're not asking them anything too personal that they have to say out loud in front of the group and all those sorts of things. It can just be a little bit more delicate.
Mm-hmm. Oh, thanks, Tracey. So you're with Brookhaven, with Dave and his large staff, and obviously there's a long history of developing college tennis players. What about working with the players at practice versus at tournaments? What are your comments on that? I mean, can you really? I know it's probably a case by case study and go individual by individual, but is that really can you get the job done just seeing them in practice versus seeing them in match play?
Oh no, I really do think I need to be at the tournaments as well, because the two are like chalk and cheese, aren't they? I mean, the tournaments are where the stakes are high, it's consequential, and this is when the wheels can fall off, and people can be quite unprepared for that. Especially if they've been comfortably training particular skills in a comfortable environment, and then the tournament is quite a different experience, both for them and for their parents. And so, you see very different things. You can almost not even recognize the same player. You can literally be working with a player during the week, and then you see them on the weekend and you almost can't recognize them, because the effect of the pressure can be so paralyzing. So it's really interesting for me to go to tournaments and see them live in action. Obviously, the ideal is for me to work with them as much as I can during the weeks, and then see them compete, make some notes, talk to them before and after the matches, and then we can tweak the specific areas that they need to work on moving forward. For some, it's more around managing nerves so that before the match, so that they can get off to a strong start. For others, they don't have any issue with that, but then they find that they struggle when the score gets close, and they have a hard time, like maybe closing out matches. For some, the struggle is around being able to come back. So if they've lost a tight first set, then they struggle to reset. It's unique to each player, and so that's where watching them in live action is really, really helpful.
Oh, that's great. Thanks for the input. And Dave?
Yes, sir.
Question for Tracey.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I love listening to Tracey speak about this. And, I've seen you in action at tournaments. I've seen you in action at the club. And Steve kind of made a mention to the size of the staff. And I from our own vantage point, just talking about within the academy, I think it's critical. We've done a great job, I think, of getting everybody on the same page with common denominators within the teaching system, as you know. But I think that we're still not caught up in getting everybody on the same page in the mental skills component, and making sure that the work you're doing behind the scenes. What advice would you give not only to us at the club, but also just to anybody running programs to try to, what are a handful of things that you would say to run through the veins of all the coaches that are working with people, that you'd like to see, that are things that endorse what you feel are very critical.
Oh gosh, that's a big question, isn't it? Yeah. Well, I think some sports psychology is quite broad, isn't it? So there's like your bread and butter things have not changed very much. So, for example, if we're going to talk about goal setting, right? That's a classic topic that sports psychologists do with their athletes regularly, setting new goals, clear goals, all the different types of goals, outcome, performance, and process goal, all the different types of goal setting. That is something that I feel like most coaches understand and don't really need any help with that. I mean, there hasn't been a lot of change in that field, for example, in that sort of dimension. There are other, I think, body language as well. I think everybody understands the importance of body language, and it's something that's obviously visible, and we can see and we can coach that during practice and at tournaments. And the more we coach that at practice, the better it will be at the tournaments for sure, because it literally becomes built into their myelin almost, like it's the same as technique, right? So body language, very important. Self-talk, between point routines, all of these things, not a lot has changed in those aspects. So I feel like if I'm just going to talk about the Brookhaven team, I don't think there's a lot I necessarily need to do with the coaching staff there, because everybody understands those concepts. And I have been really impressed with the GreatBase method in terms of how much of all of those topics is kind of baked into it. It's actually quite unusual. I mean, I have traveled all around the world and I've visited many different academies on multiple different continents. And I would say that it is remarkable, actually, how much time and love and attention is given to the mental game within the GreatBase. So, well done, everybody.
Thank you.
Yeah, there has been some changes and development, not only in sports psychology, but in mental health in the last 10 to 20 years, and specifically around thoughts and feelings, but particularly thoughts, and how much control do we actually have over our thoughts. And this is a key difference, actually, and something that I'm absolutely fascinated by and really up to the minute with all of the research in this particular topic. And this is something that I don't think has come through into sports psychology, into tennis yet. It's very well understood in some of the other sports that really, really invest in sports psychology. So, for example, soccer. But I guess the second wave of cognitive behavioral psychology, which was when I came through in my undergrad years and even my graduate studies, and certainly as an athlete myself, I was very heavily influenced by the ideas around almost relentless positivity, and these ideas around if you have a negative thought, you must stop it and you must replace it, and so on and so on. And actually, in recent times, there's a significant amount of research that shows that strategy does not work particularly well for a lot of people. And so actually, what can be a much more efficient way of handling thoughts, intrusive and unhelpful thoughts, which happen to all of us. We have almost limitless in that we have about up to 60,000 thoughts a day. And there's no way that we can possibly control all of those thoughts. Many of them arrive in our minds, fully formed sentences, and we don't even know where they came from. So we can waste a lot of energy, and we can really be fighting a losing battle if we're constantly trying to control the content of our thoughts. So the kind of the new approach, I would say, is actually to try less to control your thoughts and sort of force them to be positive, and it's more around just creating space from your thoughts, accepting them for what they are, but stepping back from them and then being able to re-engage and take valued action. And that's a very significant shift. And it's something that I don't think is well understood by many tennis coaches or tennis parents. And am I doing a good job of explaining it? I'm not sure that I am, but it's a significant difference in the way that athletes can approach their mental game. Because before we would sort of say, you've got to think positive, and certainly optimism is a hallmark of successful athletes, no doubt about that. But there's a subtle difference in our understanding about thoughts themselves, and it really is helpful for a lot of athletes if we can encourage them to kind of not judge themselves if they have negative or unhelpful thoughts pop into their minds. It's kind of like, that's okay. It's not the end of the world. Don't worry about it. Just step back from the thought and then get on with business. Get on what matters now. What's important now? What do I need to do next? Never mind my thoughts. Thoughts are not facts, and they do not control me.
Oh, that's very good. Coming back to pain, a quote from the football coach, the legendary Lombardi: "Fatigue makes cowards of us all." I know the Spanish system. I mean, they have a chapter in their program on suffering. So coming back to your study of pain, so many young gals, their last name is spelled OVA, and whether they're from Russia, Belarus, Ukraine. And I know a lot of we just here in the States, we call it the Russian mentality. And I know a lot of Russian coaches will say that you'll be mentally tough if you're physically fit. You think of the John Walker, the runner from New Zealand. How do you know what is too much? And when kids are really young, their breaking point, is it there an art to kind of holding back before they break and then building that tolerance for acquiring mental toughness?
So sorry, I'm not sure I understand the question. Are we talking about?
Yeah, so the age group. So you mentioned you really like to work with 12-year-olds, but I think many times with periodization or where the coaches, they're pushing a 12-year-old like they're a 20-year-old. How do you gauge that? It's just again case by case.
We have to be so careful with the young ones, right? I mean, my own daughter, had a talk about pain tolerance. She continued to play and through significant pain, and because she wasn't making a fuss about it, she had an underlying stress fracture that we didn't know about, and she was grumbling a little bit about it, not feeling great. And the next thing, she hit a forehand in it, and you could literally hear the bone snap. And so it was her first rib lateral, and so that was obvious. She was obviously in significant pain for it to have gotten to that point. But she, being a New Zealander, I guess our culture is to minimize pain, and so she had mentioned it, but she hadn't made a big fuss about it. And next thing we knew, it was far more serious than it needed to be. So, and of course, as a parent, you feel terrible about that. You think, oh my gosh, how did I not know that she was suffering to this degree? But that is what it is. So, yes, it's a balance. We've had other players recently suffering stress fractures too. That there's so much pressure on kids now, and families feel the timeline pressure, don't they? It's like you've got to be at this certain level by this age, or else you will not be able to get the scholarship of your dreams or whatever it is that your goal is. And so I think for some kids there's an unwillingness to step back when perhaps they should, whether that's for physical reasons because they're overdoing it, or mental reasons, maybe they're overdoing it and getting a little burnt out. But there's this constant fear around, well, if I take my foot off the gas, then I'm going to get behind. And parents feel that, and players feel that, coaches feel that too. Everybody feels it, So it's a delicate situation, and there isn't really one right answer, is there? Because no two players are the same, and some kids are very physically mature at 12, and others are just not. So, yeah, I don't know that there's really an answer to that. It is a unique case by case situation that has to be kept a very close eye on.
Oh, that's well put. I like the idea, the concept, the phrase, two words together, timeline pressure. I think when people...
I see this in the work I do.
I'm sorry?
Yeah. The timeline pressure is real. I mean, especially when the kids get to sophomore, junior year, it's like, the stress goes through the roof. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And then certainly here in the U.S. where they're looking for a scholarship. I mean, I think the SAT, ACT is coming back after COVID. I think writing essays on applications, there's so much on their table. But with, I know a lot of kids, they have to accept, and it's a tough pill, late start, bad start. They come to you and they're, we have a young player today who's, just came in today for the first time and 15 years old, and he's played quite a bit, but he's got to go back to the drawing board on a few things. But I think run your own race. I do think that they do feel, especially when you mentioned like sophomore, junior, like where am I going to get the scholarship of my dreams? Instead of, and I think that's where too here in the U.S. we're too much of a brand society. It's just to get the opportunity to go somewhere, be on a team, be a team member, and compete. But go ahead, Ilja.
Yes, You mentioned various techniques that the player can use, and what would be great if you can mention for us and tell us some of the techniques that the players can do on their own. Also, what would be your advice? How often does a player need to go and visit mental gym? On a weekly basis, what would be the exercises? 30 minutes a day, and what techniques they could be doing, and I don't know, just
Mhm.
because there's so much
Mm.
going on, practices and fitness and school, but what would be your suggestion? And again, different techniques and the time for a mental
Yeah.
gym.
Yeah. Well, the number one mental skill, like in the course that we do at Brookhaven, is very comprehensive, right? So we start. I've structured it to cover what I consider the 7 pillars of psychological mastery. So starting with mindset, and then motivation, and then focus, mental flexibility, confidence, optimism, and resilience. And then we have an 8th module, which I just call sustaining success, or habits of excellence. That's really about topics that are not strictly speaking sports psychology, but are kind of adjacent to and equally important for high performance. So topics like nutrition, sleep hygiene, and so on. So we have 8 different modules, and then each module there's at least 4 lessons, and that's how the course is structured. So each of those 7 pillars are absolutely important, and I like to say that it's like a jigsaw puzzle, and it's when you understand when all the pieces are together, then you see the picture at the end, and it's like that with mental skills. So most players, and a lot of parents too, what they want from me or from a sports psychologist in general is they're looking for like a tip or a trick or a hack that is going to, I suppose, kind of like there's this popular culture idea around the mentalist or the hypnotist or something like that. And I think they're sort of hoping, oh, well, can you just teach me a trick and then I will no longer feel anxious, or I'll just be absolutely focused. And of course, it doesn't work like that. It's a long journey, and you have to build skills, and you build it through repetition, just the same way that you do with learning how to kick serve, right? So, having said all of that, out of all of those different pillars, the number one most important one is, of course, focus. Focus is the master skill that is absolutely necessary, and if you only mastered one, that would be the one. And so now, how do you master focus? The number one source of distraction, people think of distractions in terms of things that are external normally. So they're thinking about things like the weather conditions or noise or the opponent being annoying or people on the sideline or whatever. But actually the number one focus killer, the number one biggest distraction are your own thoughts. And so in terms of the practice or the daily training, if I had to pick one thing to work with athletes that would bring them the most benefit, would be training them to learn how to notice their own thoughts and then manage their relationship with their own thoughts. So there are many, many ways of doing that. Well, endless really, and that's really the name of the game. How can we do that? and then that gets tailored to the person. Because so if you're working with a more mature person, then you could do classic mindfulness training. So that's something that I would recommend, particularly for older players. But for some of the younger ones, particularly the ones who've got attention issues, there's a lot of kids with who struggle to maintain attention, and so for those kids, then we do different type of focus training. The focus training is a big part of what I do. Does that answer your question?
Yes. No, I like that. Trick, tip, or hack. Yeah, no, that's
Yeah, that's what they want. That's what they
yeah,
want, but that's of course not. It's
quick
not
fix.
the reality.
Yeah.
In the same way that you can't, there might be all sorts of videos online of tips and tricks to with tennis technique, but we all know that that's not the reality. The reality is you've got to understand the technique, and then you need to do it over and over, and sometimes in very slow motion and without a ball and all these things. You have to, break it down to be able to build it up. And that's what we have to do with mental skills as well.
No, that's great.
Tracey and Dave, obviously you have a very large program, very successful program, building relationships through group dynamics. And obviously, again, everyone's different, but what are your thoughts on how much time does it take to really be close to a player where they open themselves up and they really let you know what their thoughts are? Dave, why don't you add to that and tell us how you two work that out?
Yeah, I think that kids, if we're talking about our relationship with kids in the academy, I think that kids are, they're very good at feeling out whether adults like kids or not. And I think there's a lot of people in coaching who don't like kids, quite honestly, that end up in it. It's kind of intriguing to me. And I love kids, just speaking from my end. And I think that some kids, you can just sense that. We have a number of students, and there are just certain kids that you just know they're going to have a very close circle. Even, they're just not going to let a lot of people in. And what Tracey said about some people are better with one-on-one, and they get kind of lost inside of groups. And I think it's important as coaches that we recognize when those kids are present in groups, and they may not have the luxury of being able to afford a lot of one-on-one. And then we as coaches need to really make sure we make the time and try to get inside of that kid's world. But I think that, I've met some families and kids, and it seems like, a week later I've known them their whole life. And then I've had kids in the program for years that I feel like I barely know. And I don't think it's necessarily because of my efforts. I feel like I'm a pretty talkative human being and go up to a lot of people and try to find out about them. I just think that it's a little bit inside of the nature of the individual. That's one of the things I love about what Tracey does is there's just not a person in the club that has been exposed to her that knows that the core of it is her care and concern for the human being and the wellness of the person. And I think that that's certainly a gateway to build relationships with anybody.
No, that's great. And with so many players at Brookhaven, how many players do you have at Brookhaven?
So many.
And
there's a lot.
What?
Yeah.
Tracey, do you mostly one-on-one, or do you have a chance to just roam and observe and go from court to court? How is your day-to-day structured?
I do more group work on the mental skills than one-on-one. I obviously do see players one-on-one, but Mostly group, and I think that maybe because of the cost, because excuse me, parents already need to invest so much money in their kids' tennis, right? And it all is fairly non-negotiable. Like they've got to have rackets, and they've got to have group training, and they've got to go to tournaments and all the different things that they have to do. So having the group mental skills option for them makes mental skills training really accessible and affordable. So that's just Brookhaven's just doing a great job offering that to their athletes, So there are some who on top of that want to do one-on-one lessons as well. And that's sometimes really needed and appropriate depending on the situation. So I would say that mostly I do group more than one-on-one. And of course, as a coach, so I spend a lot of time on court as well in the academy group training, and I do my best to infuse and bring onto the court what we've been learning off the court in mental skills. So particularly, I think Dave, has been really supportive and helpful on that front, because I'm often put with the kids who are doing match play, and that's ideal because then I can observe them making mistakes. How are they coping with making mistakes? How are they coping with losing points? How are they coping with playing somebody who's lower UTR than them that they should, quote unquote, should beat, etc. All these different things. So I get to sort of see them in action. It's not quite the same as being at a tournament, but it's the next best thing.
What about with the separation anxiety? So all kids, maybe the first experience where they go away from home, get homesick, but even just being on the court where you just know that one kid is just always looking at mom, always looking at dad, whatever parent is on the sideline. What do you think is a good balance? What's too much? What are your comments on the child being on court and being dependent upon the parent and looking at the parent?
Yeah. I think that when player is, it's a delicate question, Steve. When a player is looking over to their parent a lot, like noticeably, like every point or whatever, there are some famous instances of players who are doing that, and it appears to be working. So, for example, Alcaraz, right? He engages with his box virtually every point, and he's having a pretty successful career. So, I guess it's not for us to say there's something inherently bad or wrong with that. However, with junior tennis, what I do notice is that when players are excessively looking over to their parent, it is normally not in the same way that Alfred is looking to his box. So you can see that they're looking and they're actually concerned about what they're going to see on the faces or in the body language of their parents. So they're actually looking over, not with fear, but concern. And I think it's really hard for parents to understand this. And I'm a tennis parent myself, right? So kids are so sensitive. The parents are the most important people in their world. And you might think it's obvious to your children that you love them and that you support them no matter what, but they often, for some crazy reason, think that the level of your love is somehow going to be impacted by how well they're doing on the tennis court. And you would be amazed at some of the texts and emails and communications that I've had from players and parents. I've literally seen texts from players to parents after losses saying, "I hope you still love me." You know, I mean, I know it's heartbreaking to think that any child would worry about that, but they do. And so that's my main concern when I see juniors. And what does that mean conversely? Does that mean you're not happy when I don't win? And then, of course, you can see why the stress levels go up.
Yeah, it's eloquently put. Very, very good. Go ahead, Ilja.
Yeah, in tennis we have a lot of tennis myths. Just wanted to ask you a question. Is there any sports psychology myth that you would like to share and tell all the tennis coaches to unlearn? Is there any no list?
That's a great question.
A myth, yeah. Yes, I would say that I would say that a major myth that I would like to start working actively to dispel, because I actually think it's really, really damaging, is that you must always think positive. It is a myth, in fact, and related to that is this idea that there's another major myth that many athletes hold, which is that if I don't feel confident, I can't play well. And that's just not true. So we know now from research with Olympians and so on. Now, obviously, people who are still competing, they don't like to share their secrets or their experiences, but after they have finished competing, they're a lot more willing to share their experiences. And so there's been a lot of research done with Olympians, after they've won their medals and then they've retired, because obviously sometimes they win their medals and then the next one isn't going to be for another 4 years, and they know that they're not going to be able to last that long, depending on their age and their events. So they win their medals and then they move on from the sport, and then they are willing to share their experiences with researchers, people in my field. And it's incredible to hear what they say. And many, many gold medalists were absolutely terrified in the moment and not feeling confident at all, but were able to perform nonetheless and still get the outcome that they were after. So I would say those would be the two biggest myths that I have noticed, and one that you can experience temporary, quote unquote, negative thoughts and still perform well. And you can also experience a feeling of not being confident, but still act confidently and perform well.
Mm-hmm. No, thank you very much. Yeah, let's do this. You're so generous with your time. Let's go another round. Dave, why don't you go ahead?
Yeah, in the years I've been coaching, and it seems, Tracey, and you and I have talked about this, but it seems like kids, and again, maybe it's me just getting old, but I see a decline in what we always call AQ, adversity quotient.
Mm-hmm.
The ability to tolerate adversity. I'm not talking about life-threatening adversity, but challenge. That would be question number one, and then I have a second one for you that I'll ask after that. But what do you attribute that to? Why do you think that? And I believe it. Other people from other areas would agree with it, that there seems to be a lowering of kids' adversity quotient.
Yeah. I'm not sure that I'm qualified to answer that, because I think that that's more in the field of probably like parenting psychology. But I do think that there has been in our culture, there has been this lean towards trying to avoid discomfort and unhappiness. And this is actually a big, big part of what I do, right? Is that we have to be willing to accept and embrace the full range of emotions to be successful as human beings and as athletes, right? We can't it's not possible to live a life as a human being and not experience sadness, frustration, and all of these so-called, negative emotions. And I think what's happened in society is that there's this desire to minimize all of those so-called negative emotions and maximize all of the positive ones. And so I think what happens is, as a parent, parents are seeing their kids unhappy, whatever, and they're sort of swooping in and trying to fix the pain for them. And this is, go back to your question, Dave, I think related to this erosion of adversity quotient. So I think the reality is that life is going to be full of challenge as well. There's all the wonderful things, and there's also a lot of, difficult moments along the way. And it's exactly the same on the tennis court. And so, what I see, for example, at tournaments is what I say is, everybody's happy as long as they're winning. And then as soon as there's a loss, then, the child is distraught, the parents are distraught, everybody's unhappy, and then the parent is trying to help them feel better, and they want the coach or, whoever else to make them feel better too. And I would say to that, well, actually, what they need to do right now is they need to experience those emotions. They should feel, it's natural that they would feel sad, and there's nothing wrong with that. Just feel the sadness and sit with it and be with it, and it will pass. And then you can get back to business, So don't try to deny the emotion. Don't try to squash it. Don't try to. And in our whole culture as adults as well, we don't live in a culture where we're trying to always avoid negative emotions. And this is why people, drink too much or numb themselves with excessive TV or whatever. It's all in a quest to not experience what we perceive to be negative emotions. But all of the emotions are what make us human and make life and make tennis. So you can't be successful if you're only willing to experience the positive emotions. You have to be willing to experience the full range. So, and I'm just not sure that our entire culture is on board with that message. And so parents are trying to solve it for their kids, and the kids need to experience it all and be able to come out the other side. I mean, with babies, we're aware of this. Everyone knows, don't swoop in to comfort the child as soon as they start to cry, because otherwise they'll never learn to self-soothe and they'll never sleep through a night. So we kind of know this, but then we've almost forgotten it. And certainly when we're at tournaments, we see a lot of the parents trying to save the kids from experiencing any kind of upset, and that absolutely does not help them in the long run. Their adversity quotient goes down, and next thing you know, they're unwilling to experience any, and this is why they're dropping out of that draw, or they're not signing up to the next tournament, or whatever the case may be.
No, thanks.
Yeah.
Tracey, tell us a little about the state of tennis in New Zealand. I know you've obviously been away for many years, but what are your thoughts on New Zealand tennis?
Yeah. Well, New Zealand tennis, I think we have the same, talent as anywhere. And for me, I use the word talent very cautiously. For me, a big part of talent is the willingness to suffer and move forward. I think that perhaps, and the ability to learn, I think, is perhaps the most important talent. But so I would say, I think it's always really interesting that our top kids, our top players, always seem to be able to hang actually at a pretty high level, almost anywhere in the world. But we just don't have any depth, right? Because we have a very small population. So, that's, I guess, the difference between us and Australia or England or anywhere. I'd say our top three in any age group can hang if they're put up against top kids from any other nation. But if we have to go to like the 8, 9, 10 in that age group, they're just not there. But we have some pretty good talent. Often our talent is obscured by the flag that we're playing behind. So, for example, Cam Norrie was developed in New Zealand. He's from Auckland, where I'm from, and then he went to TCU. But in between, he switched flags to Great Britain because, obviously, being a Grand Slam nation, they have a huge amount of resource, and Tennis New Zealand has virtually no resource at all. We don't have any revenue generating events. So he represents Great Britain, but he was developed in New Zealand. We also have another player coming through, actually the son of one of my friends who I grew up playing junior tennis with. So the father, Justin McKenzie, and I played tennis as juniors, and now his son, Jamie McKenzie, is a top international junior. He's now signed to TCU as well. But you might not know that he's a Kiwi because he represents Germany, because they moved there when he was 13 for the same reasons, because you can't develop within New Zealand. We're just too far away from the action and we don't have the depth of competition. So if you're going to explore the limits of your talent, you have to get out, and that's what we all do. And then a lot of them then along the way switch to the flag of the nation where they're based. I think Kiwi tennis, we actually have a number of good players all around the world, but you just don't necessarily know that they're Kiwis.
Yeah, going back, Chris Lewis, Wimbledon final. On Cam Norrie, digress, I don't know how long, but I knew he was developed in New Zealand, but born in South Africa, raised in New Zealand, went to school in the U.S., plays for the U.K. I would just think that as far as adaptability, that's got to be a plus too, to become really strong where you're, change the scenery once in a while.
Yeah, there's one thing that Kiwis are good at, and that's traveling, right? Because we have to. The world isn't going to come to us. Well, the world does come to us, but normally only for a 2-week vacation. As New Zealanders, we know that we have to get out into the world and to develop our own potential, and also if we want to have any kind of impact, it's actually baked into our culture. We have our own expression. We have our own word phrase for it. We call it the big OE, the big overseas experience. And everyone is expected to do that. And because we're so far away from the rest of the world, when you leave, you tend to leave for a minimum of 2 years, and often many, many more. So New Zealanders are great travellers. And and that has always been that way. Mm-hmm.
Before we came on the air, I mentioned John Walker. I was in awe of John Walker as a runner. I used to, when I was studying under Braden, I'd go into the UCLA campus, and it was just to watch him work out on the track. He's got to be one of the legends of New Zealand. What comments do you have on him?
Yes, he is a legend, and newest generation probably haven't heard of him, but I certainly remember.
Yeah.
And he was fabulous. Yeah, that was the golden age of athletics, actually, for New Zealand. Again, a great example of, little old New Zealand, and yet we, punch above our weight at the Olympics and so on. We never feature at the top of the medal table in terms of number, sheer quantity of medals won. But if you look at tables that are medals by per capita, we're always right up there. So very proud of that.
No, that's great. Let's do this, Ilja. Again, thanks for your time, Tracey. This has been great. Why don't you ask a question, and then Dave, you can close it out and bring us home.
All right.
Yeah, no, again, thank you for all this information. That was a great podcast. The one more thing, New Zealand rugby team, the haka dance, that's what comes to my mind. That'll be amazing for suggestions for tennis players to create their own haka song. It just brings out the inner warrior. That's just...
Yes. Well, as you know, there's an actual war dance, and the words to the classic haka, if you translate them, are pretty they're pretty full on. Mm-hmm. It's a wonderful example of a ritual, isn't it? That sets their mindset, and an aggressive mindset, and it also bonds them together as a team. It's also very powerful. So again, going back to body language, how many times are our players before a match, huddled up with their friends looking at phones, right? The absolute opposite of getting their shoulders back and their chest out, and, mm-hmm. and encouraging their body to feel courageous. So there's a reason why the Māori, had these dances. It was A, to send a message to their opponent, and B, to send a message to their own brain. I am ready. I am strong. I am in the moment. And so, it's a classic, and every time we watch an international rugby game and the All Blacks start with a haka, it chills down everyone's spine.
Yeah. Every time I see that, that's goosebumps going through the body.
Yeah, it's a great story for people to hear. Go ahead, Dave.
Yeah, well, Steve and Ilja, the Tracey's husband, James, he's a physical specimen. And he's intimidating just shaking hands with him. But I would love to someday travel down there and see that. But it's like I said, it's been a blessing to our academy, to the club, and we have been the recipient of Tracey's knowledge and her wisdom and her caring approach for helping get our kids through this journey in the best possible manner for their mental skills development and their wellness as people. And I'm excited that you were a part of this tonight, Tracey. And I know that we're really just finding our feet on everything kind of in this regard at the club now, and it's really starting to gain momentum. And I think we need to do a better job. We need to get Coach Andreas doing more Instagram posts about the mental skills portion of everything, and get that featured on there as well. Because what I found with people in general is, they want something tangible, and you can tell a top young kid that he needs to move his grip over a little bit to be more effective, and they buy off on it. But you tell them, hey, you're really ineffective at breathing out every time you hit a ball, and it just doesn't seem to have the same impact on them. And so I think we have a lot of work to do, and I know that your messages are critical to the success of our players, and I know they'll benefit anybody who was listening this evening.
No, thank you.
you for inviting me. It's been a pleasure.
No, Tracey, thank you. But let me ask for listeners to be in touch with you. I mean, if you do any remote work, I mean, should they just go through Dave at Brookhaven? How should they be in contact or try to find out more about what you do?
Yeah, just through Brookhaven. That's where I'm at. So yeah, I don't have. I have. Yeah, no, Brookhaven. That's the way to go. I have always wanted to develop an online resource, kind of like your GreatBase website, where people can go, because I often get asked, it's like anything. There's some FAQs. There's some certain questions that come up a lot. And one of those questions would be, for example, what books do I recommend, or what podcasts do I recommend, or whatever. And so I would like to be able to make all of that available to people. But you know how it is with life. You get so busy with your day to day and you're so busy working in your business that you don't have time necessarily to work on your business. So that's not a reality yet. But I will try to develop that at some point. In the meantime, the best way to get a hold of me is simply through Brookhaven.
Well, no, again, thank you. This is a first step to put you in touch with our listeners. And we do have a network of coaches that work here, there, and everywhere. And great for you to be on, and great for us to listen to you. And look forward to doing this again.
Yes, thank you.
Wonderful. Yes, again, thank you for having me all.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Tracey.
All right, Tracey, Dave, Ilja, listeners.
See you in 5 hours, Tracey.
Yeah, see you soon, Dave.
All right. Everybody, thank you very much,
Okay,
and adios, amigos.
Yeah, thanks, guys. Have a good night.
Yeah, you too. Bye.